Welcome back to History English Stories. Today, we bring you a true story from the past, one that's strange, powerful, and maybe a little forgotten. Listen closely, follow the subtitles, and let your English grow. One mystery at a time. They say he made his horse a senator. But no one asks why he trusted the horse more than men. When Caligula was a boy, they called him the Little Boot. The soldiers of his father, Germanicus, dressed him in a miniature uniform, tiny sandals. Toy breastplate, a smile too wide for a child who had already seen so much death. His real name was Gaius. But Rome loved nicknames. Rome loves stories. And this boy, marching beside a father they worshipped, became their darling before he became their fear. Germanicus was more than a general. He was a legend wrapped in flesh. Adopted by Tiberius, the reigning emperor, he was handsome, victorious, adored by the people and the army alike. But love in Rome was dangerous. The more a man was loved, the more others grew afraid. And Germanicus died to young poison. Some whispered, illness, others claimed. Gaius, barely 6, watched his father's ashes return to Rome in an urn too small, held too tightly by a mother who screamed in public while senators averted their eyes. His childhood was shattered into exile and silence. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, became an enemy of the emperor. One by one, his brothers were arrested, starved, murdered. His mother died in exile, her bones left to rot. Gaius lived on, not because he was safe, but because he was valuable. A symbol, a pawn. And so he smiled. He smiled for Tiberius, the emperor who had likely ordered the deaths of his family. He smiled for the Senate who had watched it happen. He smiled through dinners and ceremonies and years on the rocky island of Capri, where Tiberius, now a recluse, surrounded himself with astrologers, deviants, and death. When Tiberius finally died peacefully, some say smothered with a pillow. Others claim Gaius was 24. The people roared when he took power. Statues rose overnight. Coins bore his image faster than the mint could strike them. Rome had not loved an emperor this much since Augustus, and for a few brief months he was everything they wanted. Generous, charming, radiant. He freed prisoners, recalled the exiled, held lavish games. He wept at his first public speech because the crowd's love overwhelmed him. But that love was a thin skin stretched over something raw. Because love, in Gaius's world, had always ended in betrayal. Always ended in coffins. The boy who once smiled to survive had grown into a man who trusted no one. And when illness struck sudden, severe, feverish, something changed. Some said it was epilepsy. Others claimed poison. But when he recovered, the light behind his eyes had gone out, and what replaced it was terrifying. He no longer walked the halls of Rome. He prowled them. He no longer asked senators for loyalty. He demanded worship. And not as a ruler, as a god. When Caligula emerged from his illness, Rome no longer recognized him and, perhaps, he no longer recognized Rome. The man who had once wept at the cheers of the crowd now demanded silence when he passed. The man who had once freed prisoners now relished inventing tortures so elaborate they made the arena seem merciful. Whispers in the palace spread like rot, that he talked to the moon, that he declared himself the reincarnation of Jupiter, that he slept with his sisters, then boasted of it as if daring the gods to strike him down. He had temples rededicated in his name. Statues of Jupiter were decapitated, their heads replaced with his own. A bridge was constructed across the Bay of Baia, 3 miles of planks and arrogance so he could ride his horse. Incitatus, across it in full armor, proving that he too could defy prophecy and mock Neptune. He declared war on the sea, ordering his men to stab the waves and collect seashells as spoils. He had senators whipped for not smiling enough. He turned executions into dinner entertainment. But behind the madness was a mind still deeply Roman. He understood power not as something given, but taken repeatedly, until everyone forgot what fearlessness felt like. He stripped the Senate of dignity by pretending they had any left. He'd summon senators only to watch them grovel or punish them for crimes he'd invented moments earlier. He told one, "Don't worry, I won't have you killed yet. I need someone to kill tomorrow." And Rome, once proud, became cautious, then quiet, then complicit. Because beneath the horror was something worse. Ah, he was young, beautiful, charismatic, brilliant. His cruelty wasn't clumsy, it was theatrical. Caligula didn't just destroy his enemies. He humiliated them, twisted them into symbols. He made them kneel not to him, but to what he had become. The empire's reflection, cracked and bleeding. The people began to fear what he might do next, but more terrifying was the realization that there were no limits. He had no gods above him, no equals beside him, and no past behind him. He rewrote the rules with each breath. He declared that the gods envied him. He built a temple with a golden throne where he sat to receive worship. When thunder rolled outside, he shouted, "You dare challenge me, Jupiter?" He slept with guards posted around his bed in rotating shifts. Not because he feared assassination, but because he welcomed it. "Let them try," he said once. "I am immortal. I've already died once. The rest is just amusement." And perhaps, in some twisted way, he believed it. But empires, even divine ones, cast long shadows. And in those shadows, other men began to whisper. Other blades began to sharpen. Because Rome had seen tyrants before, but never one who believed he was untouchable. Caligula no longer ruled Rome. He possessed it. As if the empire were not a republic in ashes or a people in chains, but a stage crafted solely for his spectacle. Each decree grew more theatrical, each punishment more personal, as if he were directing a play whose audience dared not look away. He dressed as Mercury, then Venus, then Apollo. One day, he appeared in public in the breastplate of Alexander the Great. The next, he wore a gown sewn with pearls, face painted gold, daring the world to laugh. But no one laughed, because they understood something horrible. This was not madness, not in the way they hoped. Madness would have been random, inconsistent, senseless. But Caligula's acts had precision, pattern, symbolism. He wasn't just tormenting Rome. He was making it feel complicit. He once invited guests to a lavish banquet, only to turn and point at them midway through, saying, "I could have all of you killed, and no one would stop me." Then he smiled, and the feast continued in silence. He made his horse Insiditus the most whispered name in the city, not because of love, but because of fear. A marble stable was built, ivory manger, guards to protect the beast from imagined assassins. Senators watched, mouths dry, as the horse was named priest. Some say he even planned to make him consul. It wasn't the madness that frightened them. It was the symbolism. He wasn't honoring a horse, he was mocking them. "You think you're important?" he seemed to ask. "Even a beast that eats oats can wear your robes." The people, once adoring, now cowered. But cowering turned to watching, and watching turned to murmurs. Even the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguard, grew restless. They had sworn to protect the ruler of Rome, not the delusions of a man who thought himself Olympus reborn. And behind the painted columns and golden curtains, Caligula began to rot, not in flesh, but in trust. He started to suspect everyone. His sisters, once symbols of divine lineage, were now threats. Drusilla, the one he loved most, perhaps too much, had died young. After her, something broke deeper than his voice could reach. The others he banished, accused of betrayal, incest, treason, sometimes all three at once. He executed without trial. He tortured for the sound of it. He burned scrolls because memory offended him. Rome's records grew thin, its silence heavy. He whispered to statues, punished shadows, screamed at thunder. And yet, when he spoke to the people, his voice was gentle, his smile perfect, as if he knew the contrast was part of the control. They could never predict him. That was the point. Fear is a knife that carves backwards. And Caligula began to feel its edge. At night, he dreamed of blades, of laughter, of walls closing in. The palace shimmered with gold, but echoed with dread. He ordered new guards, changed their shifts, demanded absolute silence in the halls. Yet he kept moving, performing, ruling if ruling meant bending the world until it cracked. The city around him was no longer Rome. It was a reflection, distorted, trembling, and fading. And somewhere, just outside the walls, men were meeting in secret. Men who had once bowed, now calculating how to make a god bleed. By now, the city of Rome held its breath. Caligula's name was no longer cheered in the streets, it was whispered through clenched teeth and behind closed doors. The man who once embodied hope had become a myth of terror, a shadow over marble. But the strangest part was not his madness, it was how the world continued as if it weren't happening. Senators still met. Laws still passed. Gladiators still fought. But everything moved with a stiffness, a hollowness, like actors in a play afraid of forgetting their lines. Inside the palace, time bent. Day and night melted into one. The feasts no longer celebrated anything. The laughter sounded wrong, too sharp, too fast. Caligula presided over it all with the serenity of a god and the suspicion of a ghost. He'd pause mid-sentence, mid-smile, and stare at someone for too long. Servants wept from anxiety before seeing him. Senators debated how deeply to bow. One man greeted him simply as Caesar and was executed for omitting divine. And yet, Caligula was not content. Power was no longer enough. What he craved was proof. Proof that he was feared, adored, obeyed, and real, because something inside him doubted it. He'd wake in the middle of the night and demand sacrifices to himself, as if the blood could silence the doubt. He built more temples, declared new holidays in his name, forced parents to name their children after him. But adoration that must be forced is only another form of loneliness. He traveled to the sea again this time to build a floating palace. Barges the size of cities, with columns, libraries, even heated baths. A palace that drifted on water, untethered by land, untethered by logic. It was beautiful and empty. No one dared relax in it. Even the sea felt tight around him. When storms rolled in, he blamed Neptune and swore vengeance. His guards beat the waves with whips. His private life, too, became theater. He took wives, then discarded them. He married one for a week. Another he stole from her husband during a banquet. He told the man, "Don't worry, I'll return her when I'm done." The man was later found dead. He slept with men, women, servants, nobles. It didn't matter. Not for desire, but for dominance. Every pleasure was a conquest. Every conquest a performance. But perhaps most telling was his obsession with Drusilla. She had been his sister, or more. No one knew for sure. She had died suddenly, and Caligula had never recovered. He deified her immediately, built her a shrine, claimed she now sat beside him in the heavens. But when he spoke of her, it wasn't as a god. It was as a lost boy still searching for the only person who had ever seen him before he put on the mask. Behind all the power, all the blasphemy, all the blood, was still the boy in little boots, the child who watched his family torn apart by the empire he now commanded, the child who learned that love meant death, that trust meant betrayal, that smiles meant survival. He hadn't become a god. He had become a monument to fear. But monuments, even golden ones, cast long shadows. And in those shadows, men with real names, real fears, and very real knives were making a plan. The empire bent, but never broke. And now it wanted something back. Control. The palace had no corners left untouched by fear. Even the marble sweated under Caligula's reign. And yet, he couldn't see it, or chose not to. He believed in his own divinity so deeply that betrayal to him wasn't possible. Who dares kill the sun? Who poisons the rain? But Romeo Romi had begun to awaken. It began with whispers inside the Praetorian Guard. These weren't just soldiers. They were the emperor's shadow, the iron behind the throne. And slowly, that iron rusted. Cassius Chaerea, one of the officers, had endured enough. Caligula mocked him openly, calling him weak, effeminate, useless, in public, in court, to servants. And humiliation, unlike fear, doesn't fade. It hardens, sharpens. Others joined, senators, guards, even palace slaves. They didn't meet in dark alleys. They met in silence moments, in passing, shared glances, half sentences. The plan didn't need to be complex, just coordinated. Caligula had made himself vulnerable in the very arrogance that protected him. He walked alone. He trusted the gods, not the men. That would be his undoing. Meanwhile, he continued to perform mock trials, divine decrees, orgies disguised as ceremonies. But something in him had started to fray. The glint in his eye was no longer joy, but suspicion. The smiles too wide, the laughter a beat too late. Drusilla no longer answered when he spoke to her statue. Even the moon, which he once whispered to from balconies, now seemed silent. Rome didn't love him, but it had stopped fearing him just enough. The day chosen was not dramatic. No festival, no grand games. Simply a modest event in the imperial theater. Caligula moved through the corridors with his usual confidence, unaware that every step echoed toward history. Around him, the plot moved like breath. Cassius Chaerea waited with others in a narrow passage, the kind where noise doesn't carry far. And still, Caligula didn't see it. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps in that final hour when the world turned quiet and even the guards wouldn't meet his gaze. He understood something the gods never did. That divinity is lonely. That immortality without reverence is just exile in gold. That fear, unlike love, doesn't last beyond the silence. He stepped into the hall. The blades were already waiting. It did not feel like the end of an emperor. It felt like the assassination of an illusion. He walked with the stride of divinity, the calm of a man who believed no hand could reach him. The corridor was quieterly so. Not the silence of reverence, but of withdrawal, absence, a breath being held. And then Cassius Chaerea stepped forward, not with ceremony, not with warning, just a single strike, a dagger to the neck. The god flinched, the others followed, blades from every direction. In the tight space, it was not execution, it was eruption. There was no shout, no final monologue. Just the sound of metal slicing fabric, the thud of knees against marble, the breathlessness of violence too long postponed. They stabbed not out of strategy, but memory every insult, every humiliation, every gesture of cruelty revisited with steel. Some say he tried to speak, others say he laughed. But the only truth is this. The emperor bled. He bled like any man. No golden ichor, no divine fire. Just red, hot, human. The guards nearby did nothing. The ones loyal to him had been dismissed earlier. Convenient or planned. And as Caligula collapsed, hands grasping at the air as if to grab back the control slipping through him. Rome changed forever, not with a roar, but a gasp. His body was left in a corner, blood pooling beside the hem of his robe. A few claimed he tried to crawl, to whisper a curse, to reach for something Drusilla, maybe. But he was met with nothing. No crowd, no thunder, no gods. Just the cold floor and the quiet eyes of the men who had once called him divine. And then, silence. It did not last, because as soon as the emperor fell, the void screamed open. His wife, Caesonia, and their young daughter, barely an infant, were murdered next. Not for what they had done, but for what they represented, a lineage. A claim Rome did not want a remnant. It wanted an erasure. But there is no such thing as a clean slate in empire. Only blood-slick memory. Word spread faster than fire. Not grief, not celebration. Just shock. People poured into the streets. Some wept, some laughed. Some ran to the temples to thank the gods. Others stayed inside, unsure if one monster had died or if a worse one would rise. The Senate convened in a panic. Some wanted to restore the Republic. Others whispered names of new emperors. Power is a vacuum that no one wants, until they smell it bleeding. In a single corridor, Rome had killed its god. But what do you do after deicide? What rises after worship dies? And perhaps most haunting of all, what if the monster wasn't the emperor, but the empire that made him? The gods had fallen, but Rome still breathed, just not evenly. In the wake of Caligula's death, the city didn't cheer, not right away. For days, Rome pulsed with uncertainty, like a heart that had skipped too many beats. There was no emperor, no plan, no clarity, only fear repurposed. What if he wasn't truly dead? What if it was a trap? What if the gods were angry? The Senate saw its chance. They rushed to restore the Republic not because they believed in it, but because they hoped power might scatter back into their hands like seeds. But the people did not follow. They had long since learned that republic meant whispers behind closed doors and bread doled out by the stingiest hands. The mob did not want old ghosts. They wanted direction, security, spectacle. Even the madness of Caligula had been, at the very least, something. Then came Claudius. He had hidden during the assassination, some say behind a curtain, others behind a statue. He stuttered. He had never been taken seriously. Caligula had mocked him openly, calling him a fool, a coward, a joke. But now, when blood still stained the marble and the scent of murder had not yet lifted, it was Claudius the guards declared emperor. Why? Perhaps because he was the last blood of Augustus. Perhaps because he was the only man in the palace without ambition painted across his face. Or perhaps because he seemed weak enough to control. But weakness is often misread. Claudius, once hidden in shadows, now wore the purple. And from that moment, Rome spun again, not backward into the Republic, but deeper into empire. Caligula was erased from records, statues smashed, inscriptions chiseled into dust. His memory was officially condemned in a process called damnatio memoria, punishment not of the body, but of legacy. Rome would try to forget him, to pretend that God never walked its streets. But memory is stubborn, especially the kind etched in fear. In the dark corners of taverns, his name returned. In dreams, his face visited senators. In the gold masks of future emperors, echoes of his madness glinted. Rome could delete his name from stone, but not from itself. And what of the people? They adapted, as they always did. The bread returned, the games resumed, the streets were swept. Rome inhaled deeply and exhaled shakily. But something had shifted. Power, once imagined as divine right, now looked more like theater. Emperors would rise, yes, but never again with innocence. Every man after Caligula ruled with the knowledge that a blade could be waiting just outside the curtain. The empire wore its wounds beneath silk now. Beautiful, organized, merciless. But Caligula's ghost lingered, not in temples, but in the architecture of control, in the fear that outlives the man who caused it. He was gone, but the questions he left behind were just beginning to speak. History tries to make sense of men like Caligula. It sifts through ash, scrolls, fragments of second-hand accounts all touched by fear or bias. Was he insane? Was he abused by power? Was he grieving, sick, poisoned? Or simply human magnified by the cruelty of circumstance and the scale of empire? No one agrees. Some say he was a monster, others a tragic figure. A boy raised in blood taught that love dies young, that masks keep you alive. That power is not something you hold, but something you become, or it devours you. And so he became the thing that could not be devoured. He tried to become a god. But gods are not born in Rome. They are made in marble, praised in poems, feared in silence, and torn down by the very hands that built them. Even the madness of Caligula is unclear. The empire had every reason to vilify him, to erase the shame of once applauding him, once bowing to him, once calling him divine. In condemning his memory, Rome condemned its own reflection. Because Caligula did not invent cruelty. He did not invent corruption or vanity or violence. He only wore them loudly. And perhaps that was his greatest sin, making Rome look at itself. Today, only shadows remain, ruins of his palaces, a few broken statues, a name that lingers like smoke in the pages of historians, often with a grimace. But if you listen closely, under the layers of myth and rumor, you might hear something else. Not the roar of a god, but the cry of a man who had no one left to call him human. Every story leaves behind a clue, not just about the past, but about language too. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories told in clear English with subtitles. Thank you, and until next time, keep wondering, keep learning, keep listening.